Hello, friends. Thanks for joining us today for Movability Live. We're so excited that you could be here today as we have a live streaming conversation with Transit Forward. And today we're going to be featuring outgoing, is it okay to say outgoing? Because you are pretty outgoing, Executive Director Bill McCamley, and then incoming Executive Director Ashika Ganguly, who is here today to talk about Transit Forward as it's been in the past and where it's going in the future. Thanks so much for being here today and on this kind of misty, rainy day. So I'm glad that you didn't have to go traveling and certainly didn't need to take a car to come here on the broadcast this morning. How are you doing?
Good, Lonnie. It's great to see you.
Oh, I'm glad you were able to make the time to be here for the broadcast. And, I'm excited about where things are going, just generally with transportation in the region. It seems like no matter where you go, no matter what conversation you have, you're one of the topics of conversation, right? Like the work that you're doing is right at the top of the fold, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I feel like transit is a conversation that is happening more and more in Austin as things with Project Connect progress and as our city continues to grow and expand, how people are being able to get around the city, come in and out of the city is always a very pressing topic for folks.
Well, so, I think for some of the people who are watching, they probably know who Movability is, although I don't know, I might have to explain that too. But for some of the folks who are watching, they may be wondering what is Transit Forward, and even how is Transit Forward different than Movability? Did either of you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that just because when I took the job in the summer of 2022, it was brand new organization. And the long and short of it is this. After Project Connect gets passed by the voters in 2020, a lot of people around that were supportive of the project said, hey, let's look at other cities and what they've done well to implement the stuff that was on the ballot in 2020. And what they found was in successful cities, Phoenix being a good example, there was a separate organization that was formed and existed to do a lot of the education and engagement work that many times the agencies themselves sometimes was not in the wheelhouse or sometimes frankly couldn't do for legal reasons. And so Transit Forward was formed to help really engage and educate the public about these really critical issues that we find going around town. And we've been able to really do that pretty well for the last 3 years. Super excited that Ashika has taken this forward. She is extremely passionate, very intelligent, and gets it. She's from Austin. She understands that driving on Mopac sucks, right? That having different ways of getting around is super, super important for people's affordability. We know it's important as we really try to fight climate change effectively and all those other good ideas.
Well, so, with that in mind, then why are you leaving Transit Forward? It just seems like this is the moment, right?
Yeah, I want to be very clear about this. I love Austin so much. When I moved to Austin after my last job, I'm not going to go into my life story, but I was in a pretty bad spot. Long and short of it is, for those of you that don't know, I was the Secretary of Labor in New Mexico. So I ran the unemployment office during the pandemic. And yes, it was as bad as you think initially, right? So I got to Austin with a car and 4 bags of clothes doing a life reset and feel I felt nothing but welcome from people and care and positivity. And Austin is such a great town that combines this big, growing, energetic place with the fact that it's probably the biggest small town in America, right? Everyone still treats each other like they're in a small town, which is a good thing. Everyone, you can talk to someone in a grocery store, you can be on the bus and have a conversation. There's still a lot of, hey, I know this person, they can help me out over here, and that's a good thing. And a lot of big cities lose that personal connection thing when they get bigger, and Austin really hasn't. I will say this though, and I'm going to leave it this because I don't want to get this into a national political conversation, but the election really affected me as someone who spent 20 years in elected and appointed office, and I felt it was time to get back to New Mexico to be closer to my mother, who's in my hometown, and my sister, who is a VA doctor up in Albuquerque, and she's wondering if she's still going to be there, right? So being around is really important. And then I'm also going to try to, get back into the political game in some way, shape, or form to really defend the values that I believe in. But I feel so strongly about that I even had to leave this wonderful job at Transit Forward.
So you imagine yourself working more at the federal level, I guess, than at the local level.
Just to be honest with you, I think one of the ways we can defend democracy is by making sure that states and cities that are defending their constituents in really important ways have support. And that's really the avenue that I'm exploring, just because that is, before I got to Austin, that was my background.
Well, so are there some accomplishments that Transit Forward has already achieved that you're proud of?
Yeah.
Since it's part of the legacy that you've left here before you head out of town?
Yeah, Lonnie, I think the biggest thing and the most important thing that Transit Forward was able to do was bring together an extremely diverse alliance of people that you normally wouldn't see in the same room in day-to-day life, because there's this Venn diagram of overlap of people that really want transit. So if you look at Transit Forward's board of directors, for instance, it is super diverse. You have 3 or 4 different chambers of commerce. You have the real estate council. You have the Downtown Austin Alliance, which is all the property owners downtown. These tend to be center-right business groups. And you have a Black Baptist pastor. You have the Disability Coalition. You have Housing Works. You have a student member, because there are so many different groups around the community that really understand how critical it is for there to be more bus, train, pickup, bike share, all these other services, because as Austin grows, there's only a certain amount of space, and you can't just build roads to solve all of the problems. I mean, TxDOT even is very honest about this, and they have this presentation where they say in the last 40 years in the Texas Triangle, so Metroplex, Austin, San Antonio, Houston, there's been a 172% increase in car registrations. There's been a 19% increase in highway miles built. And that's where I guess one of the frustrations that I had is this all seems to be political. And at the end of the day, it's just a math problem, right? You can only fit so much stuff through so much space. So having people have other options. Can we take the train up to the Austin FC game? Can we take the 801 from where I live in North Austin downtown to get to work? The more options people have, the better it is for everybody, because everyone that does decide they want to get on a train or a bus or whatever, they're not driving their car. And so that's actually better for the car commuters. And I think spreading that message was really important to us, and having that diverse group of folks that stuck together, where a lot of times you wouldn't see that, is a huge thing that Transit Forward brings to the community.
Yeah, I think Movability shares this messaging with you as well. We regularly talk about this, that our region is one of the most congested in the United States, and we're adding 70 more cars every day to the road. And you could ask just about anybody, and they'll tell you our region is doubling in size from 2 million to 4. But we're not doubling the number of roads. To your point, 172%, you said, increases in registration. And how much has the road size expanded?
Yeah, in the last 40 years, 172% increase in vehicle registration, 19% increase in highway miles, dealt. And you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand that those numbers don't really jive.
Yeah, it's really this geometry problem. And I think you actually set up a local version of this image, but we like to show this image of 70 people on the street next to a bus, and then 70 people next to bikes. And then what I love telling people about this image is this is 70 people, and this is not 70 cars. This is a lie. I just ran out of space on this slide for the 70 people. This is 35 people. And so, in fact, some of the takeaways here are really that, this region is not a northeastern city, right? So a lot of people live in places where they really maybe can't choose a bus, or they can't choose to ride a bike to go to work. They maybe have to drive. But if they choose to share the ride and carpool, then instead of it being 70 cars on the road, it might be 35 cars on the road, and they're saving this much space. But in addition to that, every time we have a transit lane, one of those bus lanes during rush hour, and you see a bus go by, well, maybe there aren't 70 people on the bus, but there are likely 35 people on that bus during rush hour. And that means this many cars were off the road because we allowed that bus lane to exist. And it's one of those light bulb moments where people realize, oh, that's what the bus lane's for. But also, even if I can't ride on the bus, I can be part of the solution just by sharing the ride with somebody, even if it's in my car. And I think, these conversations were very difficult to have. And it's only now that we're really in this 2 million to 4 million person hop that people, as you said, from all walks of life, not just people who consume transit, but people who are in land use and development, people who are in completely different trades, are suddenly starting to realize we need this infrastructure if we don't want to choke on our own success.
And Lonnie, I will say one thing Transit Forward did a couple of years ago. We sponsored a poll of Austinites. And what it did was show, Austinites are still massively supportive of Project Connect. They want it done. They voted for it. They feel strongly about it. They want a democratic process where they feel like their voice matters. And so having that continue is really important. But it also really took the temperature of Austinites in terms of why they support Project Connect and why they want more transit options. And it was actually kind of surprising to me, because we talk about traffic, and I thought that would be the highest issue in terms of people's intensity. Turns out affordability was number one. We know that Austin has become expensive to live in over the past 10, 20 years, right? With rents and transportation. And the more options you have in terms of transit, especially combined with housing living near transit, the cheaper it is to get around. So if you can give up a car, and we're not saying everyone needs to give up a car, whatever, but if you have the option, let's say you have a 2-car family and you live somewhere where there's a good bus or a good train option, you can actually save $10,000 a year out of your budget. Now, obviously, even if you drive less, you're still saving money, but that is the most concrete affordability thing that Austin can do. The second thing was actually not traffic even there, it was climate change. I think as you see Lake Travis levels continue to stay low, you saw 2 years ago we had this massive drought. I went and played a soccer game in October out in Pflugerville. It was 102 degrees in the middle of October, right? People are starting to actually feel the effects of climate change, and you don't have to be a victim of a flood or wildfire to feel it. But we're never going to get in Austin to net zero, which is where Austin wants to be by 2040, without more dense housing and more transit options, because those are the number 1 and 2 contributors to greenhouse gases that Austin has. So I think people understand this, but it's really important to have an organization like Transit Forward that continues to remind people about all these issues, as there's a very few number of people who don't like this for whatever reason, and really remind people, hey, this is what you guys think, and we agree with you, and this is why it's important. And that's why the work Ashika is going to be doing moving into the future is just so damn critical for the community.
Well, speaking of that, I think let's hold it right there. I think we're going to take a break here, and then we'll come back and speak more with Ashika on this next half. And also, as you can see on screen, Victoria, thank you for watching on our live stream. And anybody who's watching on our live stream can leave comments, notes, and questions, and we'll bring them into the conversation later during this discussion. You are listening to Movability Live. We'll be back after this.
E acabei acreditando em ilusões. Eu nem pensava em ter que esquecer você. Agora vem você dizer, amor, eu errei com você. E só assim podia entender que o grande mal que eu fiz foi a mim.
All right, and we're back. And we are having a conversation with Transit Forward today on Movability Live. And our guests today are Bill McCamley and Ashika Ganguly. And first of all, Ashika, am I completely ruining your last name? Because I need to know definitively how to do this, because we're going to be working together for years and years to come.
Yes, it is Ganguly.
Okay.
You nailed it, Lonnie.
Okay, good. Everybody should know. Because, I met you out on the campaign trail,
Yes.
a totally different thing. And I'm wondering, what attracted you to Transit Forward?
Yeah, I mean, so many things. I think transit has been an issue that's been on my mind in Austin for a long time. For those of y'all that don't know me or aren't familiar with me, I am a born and raised Austinite. So grew up in this beautiful, amazing city and seen it grow up alongside me in so many different ways over the last 30 years. And I started my career as a classroom teacher. And when I was teaching fifth grade in downtown Austin, we were an open transfer school. So we got kids from all over the city. We had a very mixed and diverse student population, especially in terms of socioeconomic status. So, we had kids in high rises downtown, alongside kids from East 5th and 6th Street, alongside families that were living in the Salvation Army homeless shelter when it was on 8th Street. So lots of families, parents, students relying on public transit, both to get to school and to get to their jobs. So I got a pretty firsthand view about how important it is to keep our economy and our community running. From there, I moved into a career in public policy. I worked at the legislature for Representative John Busey for the last 2 years. And then I recently, as Lonnie kind of alluded to, wrapped a campaign for Austin City Council in District 10, West Austin, where we got very close. Didn't quite make it all the way, but in an area that has historically been less amenable to topics around housing and public transit. I really feel very proud of how we were able to talk about those issues and move the needle in that area of Austin. And through my campaign, coming from the state level down to the local level, really got to learn so much about issues of housing and transit and why they are so important for the future economic development of our city, for the lives and equitable nature of Austin and Austinites. And so after the campaign, I went back to the legislature, wrapped things up in a neat and tidy bow to hand off to my replacement, and was really looking for the next place that I could be most useful to continue to move Austin forward. And that's when the board reached out to me and let me know that Bill was moving on. And Bill and I got to know each other pretty well during my campaign, and he was just a constant presence in the city, on the campaign trail, always talking about these issues and why they're so important. Bill got me excited about these issues when I was just a candidate. And so it seemed like the right place at the right time, the perfect opportunity for me to use my state knowledge, my local knowledge, my lived experience as a classroom teacher, to really be useful to the future of Austin.
Well, you're being rather coy about your time at the legislature. I mean, working for Representative Busey, I think you had a front row seat to saving Project Connect during the last legislative session, right?
Yeah. Yes. My former boss was an integral part of making sure that that bill did not make it across the finish line and that we could continue moving forward with this project in Austin. We worked really hard when it was in the House committee to get the bill to a place where it would be amenable to our local lawmakers and to Austinites. But when the version came back from the Senate, it was completely prohibitive, punitive, not anything that would be really, to me, it's an issue of local control. And the bill was an infringement on local control. This is, my former boss was the vice chair of the elections committee. We talk about voting rights in our office all the time. This was a voter approved project. The people of Austin voted for this project, and it's a complete and utter infringement on local control for the state legislature to come and put in prohibitive measures to stop us from doing this project.
Well, so do you have any insights about how Project Connect might fare during this legislative session, given what you know so far?
Yeah. It's going to be an interesting session, that's for sure. Both Representative Troxclair and Senator Betancourt, who filed the bill on the House and Senate side last session, have publicly stated they plan to refile the bill this session. So far, neither of them has. For those of you who aren't keeping close tabs on the Texas legislature, we recently had a lot of ups and downs in the House about our speaker and about House rules and procedures. So during the House speaker fight, Representative Troxclair was a vocal supporter for Representative David Cook, who was in the running to become our next Speaker of the House, right, to the point where she even went and spoke in support of him on the front mic. And long story short, a broad coalition of Republicans and Democrats came together in the House to support his opposition, Representative Dustin Burrows, who eventually was successful. And so now that Representative Troxclair was, a vocal supporter of an opponent of our now Speaker of the House, she is unlikely to have a very powerful role in this session. She's kind of persona non grata, so to speak, which is good news for us and what we're trying to do. Yeah. What remains to be seen is if she is going to be the representative that will carry that bill forward in the House. Right. I think we've seen Senator Betancourt, who is the lawmaker who created the more punitive, prohibitive version of the bill, whether he chooses a different House member to carry it on the House side is something that we're going to have to really keep our eye on.
I see what you mean. I guess for those not familiar with the legislature, there's so many different hoops you have to jump through. So, first there's filing the bill, and there'll be like 3 or 4 different versions of it. And then it has to get heard in committee. And so people have to go and show up to committee. And then it has to get moved to calendars, and it has to get out of calendars, and then shows up on the floor. But even still, it could just be stuck onto any bill in the floor at the end. And so, we're really looking at other organizations to keep us on track so that we don't just go chasing every rainbow at the legislature. So
for sure. There's so many different points in time that a bill can be fast-tracked or killed throughout the legislative process. And we saw it last session, the bill made it all the way through the House, then all the way through the Senate, then back to the House. And that's where it was eventually killed by my former boss delivering that point of order. So it's important that we follow it carefully. The good news for us is that we're just more organized and more prepared this time. I think last session there was a lot of just figuring things out as they came. There is a broad coalition of people who know that this bill is going to be important for the future, not only of Austin, but for Texas. A project of this size and scale, a $7 billion infrastructure project, is going to be utilizing resources from all over the state. There are rural and suburban and urban lawmakers all over the state that will see economic benefit to their district because of Project Connect. So this coalition of folks that are keeping our eye on this legislation, making sure that we can communicate to these legislators that this is not just a benefit to Austin, but a benefit to Texas. We want to see the economic growth in this state that will come from an infrastructure project of this size.
Yeah, and I can see that the funding mechanism impacts everyone around the state. And then separately, Texas doesn't often get to pull down FTA dollars. It seems like we keep giving them to DC. We might as well be pulling them back to our state.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. We have been historically kind of a donor state, so being able to bring some of those dollars back into our state. And with the change in administration, it is kind of a good news situation that we are in a red state, and being able to talk about bringing those dollars into not only a coastal state or a coastal city, but into a red state in the middle of America will be helpful for what we're trying to do here.
Well, so let me just ask straight out, because people ask me all the time, what do you say when somebody says, should we be worried about Project Connect?
Worried, I don't know if I would use the word worried, but I also wouldn't talk about, I wouldn't assume that everything is rainbows and butterflies either. So making sure that we're being proactive about all of the imminent threats that might be coming to the table is important. We shouldn't be going into this situation acting like everything's going to be fine, but we should also realize that this is not unique to Austin or to this project. Infrastructure projects of this size and this scale in cities all over America are always going to have outside threats. They're going to have legislation. They're going to have lawsuits. They're going to have opposition. It's just part of the situation that we're in. But I think we have seen a broad coalition of business owners, community members, state leaders that understand this project is beneficial for Austin. And the good news is that things are moving as scheduled. The project is underway. ATP is moving forward as scheduled. The DEIS came out last week, and things are really good news there. Everything is on track. We should be happy about the success that we've made this far. We should be positive, but we should also make sure that we're keeping an eye on anything that could be coming down the pike.
Well, Ashika, we've gotten a question from our audience. And again, anybody who's watching on Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, you're welcome to put comments in the chat, and we will promote them on screen and ask questions of our panel. And this is from Texas Walk Bike Roll. They ask, are you looking to get bipartisan support from nearby rural counties? And they say they know that up in Williamson County, there are rural conservative anti-highway groups that in theory would support transit. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Transit is not a partisan issue. It is something that we should be building the table as broadly as possible, where we can have Republicans, Democrats, and everyone in between supporting the projects that we're working on. Especially in Austin, we should be thinking regionally. My former boss was a representative up in Williamson County. And so as our city continues to become more and more expensive, we have families, students, and everyone else moving into our rural communities, into our regional communities, into our suburbs, and they need ways to be able to get in and out of Austin. They are still working here. They're going to school here. I recently spoke with someone who works at ACC, and she was speaking to a lot of their students sorry, my dog. A lot of their students are living in Hayes County or Elgin or Williamson County, but they're still taking classes in Austin. They're still coming to their jobs in Austin. We have workers who may be living in the suburbs, but are still coming to work at restaurants, at daycares, and everywhere in between in the city limits. So we need positive growth in our transit systems to bring people in and out of our region, in and out of our metro area, and in between metro areas as well. I believe that there are a lot of rural lawmakers, local mayors, regional mayors, and city councils that understand that we should be working together and building our transit systems in conjunction with one another. So that's definitely a goal of mine, is to increase the regionalism of the transit conversation in Austin, and to work on building this table as wide as possible.
And if I can just add real quick on that, Lonnie, I was actually doing a presentation about 7-8 months ago to an engineering group up north, kind of near Round Rock. And one of the guys was like, hey, man, I live in Cedar Park. I'd love this to get up near me. And my response was pretty simple. If you don't get the core system in place, you can't expand it. You know, Austin had a chance to get a light rail system in 2000. Mayor Watson is very famous for saying the best time to have built light rail starting in Austin was 2000. The next best time is now. And so to those folks in the outer communities, I would say you got to have the core first, and then you can expand. Expanding is actually a lot easier than building the system from scratch with the maintenance facility and all the additional engineering and getting it through downtown. Once you get that in place, it is not easy, but it is easier to expand those rail lines out to where you're going. So I think Ashika is absolutely correct, and let's get it in place, and then you can start expanding.
Well, for those who are just joining us, we are having a conversation with Ashika Ganguly and Bill McCamley from Transit Forward, and we're going to take a little break, and we'll be right back after these messages. Stay tuned.
I don't wanna be your friend, I just wanna be your lover. No matter how it ends, no matter how it starts, forget about your house of cards, and now
Lonnie, I think you're muted.
Thanks. We're back, and you're listening to Movability Live with Bill McCamley and Ashika Ganguly from Transit Forward. And during the break, we showed you some information about Go Grant. And as Ashika and Bill were mentioning, there are people coming from all across the region trying to get to work. And if you have ways to reduce the amount of driving alone they do, you can qualify for grants up to $7,500 to get your workers there, regardless of whether they are in Austin or traveling to or from Austin for work. You can go to movabilitytx.org/Go Grant for more information about that. But we're back, and I wanted to ask some questions about those who are opposed to Project Connect. And I seriously doubt anyone who is on this call today is one of those people. But guess what? Anytime I go to a Project Connect workshop, I run into some of these people, as I would expect to. And so, when I talk to them, they have several concerns that include the route length, the destinations that have been chosen, some of the property impacts, and then, of course, the cost of the light rail component, at least. And so, as an alternative, some of them have suggested that we should replace the light rail altogether, either with bus rapid transit or a series of circulator shuttles like the Cap Metro pickup service. And so I'm wondering, what do you say to constituents who maybe think that light rail is the wrong investment for our community at this time?
Yeah, I think
Let's start with Ashika. I'm sure Bill is like ready to hit like punch, but Ashika, this is going to be you for a while. So what are
right.
you telling people?
Well, these were topics that came up pretty frequently when I was campaigning in West Austin, which is a region where I think you'll find more opponents to Project Connect than other areas of Austin. And I think they're all valid concerns. The price tag of the project, this isn't what we voted on. It's shorter than we originally envisioned. It's a smaller project for a larger price tag, et cetera, et cetera. I want to echo Bill's words that he was echoing from Mayor Watson earlier about we could have been doing this project as early as 2000. And one of Austin's biggest, Achilles heels, I feel, is just not being proactive enough to set our city up for success. And so I feel like too often we're looking backwards and trying to recapture something that has been gone for 5 years. And so we need to be not thinking with a 5-year view or a 10-year view. We need to be thinking with a 50-year view. And while BRT and the shuttle services are essential parts of a healthy transit ecosystem, they have their place, they serve their purposes, they're really helpful. They simply are not at like a high capacity transformational transit system that rail would provide for Austin. Bill spoke earlier about being able to establish this transit system in our central core is an essential first step, and it's much easier to build out from there. So while we had this really grand vision when we all went and voted in 2020 for this project, this is still a really essential and really important first step for us. And we have, after we establish this core of the Yellow Line and Project Connect, we have the ability in years to come to add extensions to the airport, to Crestview, into our regional communities. That's going to be phase 2, phase 3 of this project. We simply cannot turn over just the same amount of people that we would be able to on a train with the frequency that we need to be able to on a bus or in a shuttle that we can with rail. And I think ultimately the biggest thing with rail is that it is not stuck in traffic. And so we're not worrying about sitting on the bus for 20 extra minutes because there was a wreck on the road. We're not worrying about congestion in downtown with our shuttles. We are completely bypassing that with light rail and being able to turn over and move around people through the city with ease because of rail.
And Lonnie, if I could just piggyback on Ashika for a second, she's spot on. She's got this down. Let me just add a couple of things. The first is, let me just brag on the Austin Transit Partnership for a second. When they were talking about worries about where the route goes, when ATP made the decision in summer 22 to say, hey, no one saw the pandemic coming, no one saw the massive inflation that everyone feels, the price of eggs and rent, also affecting labor and supplies and land that you needed for these systems, they ripped the Band-Aid off and they said, guys, we're not going to blow smoke up your tails. We're not going to lie to you. Here is what is going on right now. And by the way, this is happening everywhere else. We are going to have a targeted and comprehensive public engagement process. And those folks at ATP have been out there doing the work, talking to people. And they're not just talking to people endlessly, because that's the way projects don't get done. They said, We're going to have these, month or two long engagement sessions, and they go everywhere. They go to Montopolis, they go up north, they go downtown, they go to where people are at, and they engaged during that time, I think like 8,300 people in 6 weeks, which is one of the most effective examples of that I have ever seen. So people did make their voices heard. ATP did listen to them in a number of different ways to get to where the system is. The second thing I would say is kind of what Ashika was talking about. If you look around the world, the most effective systems combine a light rail system with a good bus system, with good sidewalks and bike lanes, because you've got to have those connections. The best example of how that's going to work, I think, is the Pleasant Valley and Riverside Station when it's done with the light rail and buses. Because what you have there, you guys know where that HEB and Planet Fitness is, right there on Riverside and Pleasant Valley. They're going to put a light rail line that's going to go from downtown eventually out to the airport, and going north-south will be one of the new Metro Rapid bus lines that'll look a lot like the 801 and the 803 there. So if I'm living down Pleasant Valley all the way down to Dove Springs, or I'm living up in Miller, or whatever people want to Pat always gives me crap for talking about it, Mueller, but if you're living up in Mueller and you want to come down that thing, you can then catch the train to the airport, right? If you're living down in Dove Springs, you can take that new bus system up to Pleasant Valley and Riverside, then catch the train over into downtown. Those connections are what make a good transit system work, and that you need all of those components to be effective.
And just on screen for those who aren't familiar, I'm on the ATP website, which if you click on light rail, you can see more information about the draft environmental impact statement, which was mentioned already during this discussion. And what we're seeing here is just a little bit west of what would be that Pleasant Valley and Riverside station, just because it was showing what the median would look like if the updates would be in place, placing new trees and bike and pedestrian infrastructure in the center of the street with the light rail. And you can see how it's integrating with the bus network as well as the bike and pedestrian environment, as Bill was talking about, the synergy between them.
Yeah, I think that's one point, Lonnie, that the project is not just going to increase the transit capacity, but also help our pedestrian experience in a lot of these areas. In that area that you were highlighting on the drag, I went to ATP's public information session on campus yesterday, and just seeing the students, they had VR headsets where the students could put it on and experience what the drag is going to feel like when it's closed to pedestrians. And it's something that is really, really exciting to students and helpful for just the ecosystem of our downtown environment. I know when I went to undergrad at UT, Speedway was open to cars, and it was just, and then when I came back for grad school, it was all of a sudden this beautiful paved pedestrian walkway, and just the juxtaposition of my experience as an undergrad versus a grad student with a pedestrian only zone was really, really amazing for me to experience myself. And I can only imagine what it's going to do for the students on campus and the businesses as well when we have the drag as a pedestrian zone.
It is kind of funny. I've lived in this town now for 25 years, and I can tell you that there are people who have no idea that Speedway was a through street, and you could drive around the Capitol at rush hour. It was such a great. Oh my God. It wasn't until 9/11 that suddenly they realized that maybe driving around the Capitol during rush hour was a bad idea for security.
Right.
And then, people lost their minds about closing Speedway through campus. But now, if you walk through UT, you can't imagine UT without that boulevard. That walking place makes such a difference. And I think it's going to be a very similar experience there on the drag when we have that. It's just like Rainey Street today. Every time a bar closes, they're like, "How dare you close this bar?" But they're brand new bars. They just put them there,
Well, and Lonnie, just to throw it out there, just so that you know, a couple of years ago, a guy who used to write for Towers.net, I can't remember his name. He's not there anymore, but he did a whole analysis of the economic benefits of when streets near campuses, as Ashika was talking about, it's going to happen with the drag, move to this type of system, and businesses do well, right? They absolutely benefit from access by walking, biking, and using transit. And then Transit Forward actually a couple of years ago had an interview with the guy who was the president of Juiceland. Now this guy actually used to be the regional manager of Starbucks out in Denver when the regional light rail got put in there. And he was just saying, look, it is so good for business to have these transit resources near where we operate, because you get workers can come in and they don't have to have a car to get into to work. It's cheaper for them. And customers can come in and not have to worry about friggin' traffic or parking to be able to come in. So he was like, we want Juiceland to be near as many of these stops as possible. And he's super stoked that the light rail is going to come up and down there for their drag location.
Yeah, I think the impact on business is really key. Lonnie, you mentioned earlier talking about the impact on businesses during construction. And I think that's another thing that we can really give praise to ATP over, is that they're doing a lot of focus groups with the real retail and businesses on South Congress and in those areas to make sure that they're impacted as least as possible. And speaking to how light rail is going to positively impact businesses, like Bill mentioned, in grad school, I worked as a barista at a coffee shop downtown, and I had to pay for parking every day that I went to work. And that's 8 hours of parking every day that's coming directly out of my wages that I was making at that coffee shop. So we have so many workers that need places to either park or a way to get there without a car. And so it's going to attract so many more workers and businesses into downtown to have this light rail as an option.
I think you're bringing up a point that is one of my go-to points. I feel like when we talk about transit, so often we're talking about it as a social service because it moves people around. But we don't talk about highways that way, and they move people around. Like I go to school I go to medical services. I access nonprofits and food banks that way. But we seem to talk about transit only as though it's a social service versus an economic development tool, since
Right.
we know there's going to be land development around this infrastructure. And I wonder how Transit Forward is approaching this issue, especially given the political winds that are around us at the moment and going into the legislature. Is this part of how you're positioning transit with our elected officials?
Totally. Speaking to the comment earlier about talking to bipartisan elected officials and others about this issue is something that I'm really focused on going into 2025. As I said, I don't believe that transit is a partisan issue. I think historically, because it's utilized at a higher rate by folks from a lower socioeconomic status, it is seen as more of a social services tool. But that's something that we really need to reframe. And I think that light rail especially is going to really change that conversation in Austin, because it's something that I foresee being used by a much wider swath of people in the city. And especially because of where that phase one of the plan is going to be in our downtown business and industry core, it's going to really affect a lot of our office workers, our retail, our consumers, our workers in a really key way. So we've already seen so many business leaders from our local chamber and partner chambers completely buy into light rail and be so supportive of this project. And like I said, it's a goal for me to continue thinking regionally, thinking about widening the table and talking to elected officials, regardless of party, about why this is an important issue.
Now, believe it or not, Movability hosts an annual commuter survey each year in the 3-county region.
I believe it.
And, I wanted to spell one of the myths about transit. We found that during that survey that there was no statistical difference in household income between people who were transit riders and not transit riders.
Okay.
There was no difference in income between those who use bicycles or e-bikes. But the difference between people was how many cars they owned. That was the difference. Now, where we did see the household income play a factor was whether people were willing to van pool. And van pooling is unlike carpooling where, it's your car. With a van pool, it's a leased vehicle and there's 4 or 5 of you and you meet at a muster location. And apparently, if you get to $80,000 a year at your household income, then the interest drops off. But again, for transit, despite what people may think, there was no statistical difference in household income. It really was a matter of if you got 4 cars in your house, it's too convenient for you to consider the transit schedule. But if the fewer cars you have, the more likely you are to consider transit.
And Lonnie, that's where I think Ashika's right, put the nail on the head here. This should not be about politics. I think there's a lot of folks out there that just think trains are communism, buses are communism. We don't like that. This is a math problem. It's a math problem in terms of transportation, like we talked about. There's a lot more cars than there used to be and just not as much road space. And it's a math issue in terms of affordability. If workers have more options to get around at a cheaper expense, they're going to have more ability to live closer to town and be more participating in the community. And by the way, I will also say this, for a lot of employers, having the ability for workers to live closer to their jobs is hugely important. I remember during a lot of the discussions around some of the zoning issues at City Council last year, which are tied absolutely to the hip with transit, there was a guy at one of the local clinics who was saying, my radiologists can't afford to live near downtown anymore. They all want to live out in Round Rock and Pflugerville and all that sort of stuff. And so they don't want to go down there either. Like it takes them a ton of time, a ton of money. And so having the ability for workers to be able to be near places where they work and get there at an affordable way is better for business and better for Austin as a whole.
So we've got one last question here from our audience. And certainly if you leave other questions in the chat, we'll try to get to them. I'm not sure, do you have exact data for this? It says, do we have data indicating density improvements leading to higher ridership on existing bus lines in the city? And what does that correlation look like? I'm not sure if you're able to answer this. I'm sure if I invited the Austin Transit Partnership and the work they've been doing for their draft environmental impact statement, they could answer this like that because of the ETOD proposals. But have you seen any of that data?
I have not seen any hard data around this issue, but I will say that Cap Metro only puts bus routes and transit options where it makes sense. And so they don't make decisions willy-nilly. I live in West Austin. We have less bus routes here because it's less dense. And there are less people taking it. So it looks like there is something in the chat about density. There we go.
Oh, well,
Sharmila knows all this.
The executive vice president of planning at Cap Metro has weighed in.
So Lonnie, oh, sorry, Ashika, may I step in here real quick? Just so the numbers that I remember from being at the federal level when they evaluate proposals that come to them, they want around 20 to 25 households per acre and the half mile around a bus stop, and 30 to 35 housing units in the quarter mile surrounding train stops. And that might be half mile, I can't remember. But the point is that the more density that you have, and look, again, not rocket science, it's easier to get to those stations. And Dottie Watkins from Cap Metro does just a superb job explaining this when she says, look, we have X amount of buses and X amount of drivers. The more folks living closer together, the more people we can serve with those X amount of buses and X amount of drivers. The farther out everybody goes, the harder it is to get to those folks. And so the numbers are there, but then the concept is pretty easy as well. And I would also say, if you haven't had a chance to do Cat Metro's little board game about transit services,
Yeah.
Lonnie, you played it, right? It's actually pretty
Oh, yeah.
good, right?
It is.
And it
It's
shows,
good.
okay, here's the amount of buses that you have. Here's where people and businesses are around the town. Show us the most efficient way to do this. And they actually score you based on how you place those. And so, yeah, again, you want more density, and that makes putting more bus and train systems in a lot more effective and easier for everybody.
Well, I think it follows with common sense. If you've got more places to live and work and shop, then more people consider that a destination, and more people want to get there. And so at some point, there's so many people there, so many places there, that finding a parking spot becomes difficult. And so you got to think of another way to get there. And that's where carpooling comes in, that's where biking comes in, and that's where transit comes in. And it's about the choice. It's about having an option, because the dirty secret is, if we remain a successful place, there will always be traffic, but it's about getting yourself out of the traffic. And that's what the options are for.
Yeah, if I'm living in an area where I can go to the grocery store, I can go to my gym, I can walk my dog and do everything I need, go to work, do everything I need to do by walking or biking, then the times that I do need to move further across the city and I'm less likely to want a car in a walkable area, then that's when I really need transit. So density for sure drives our transit ecosystem. Housing and transit are both two sides of one coin, and should be a conversation that is moving within lockstep of each other.
Well, folks, we're getting to the end of our time together, and I wanted to make sure that we had just a little bit of time to make sure that we addressed, again, some of the services that are available to businesses that are on these corridors. We mentioned Go Grant, and again, the spring application window is about to open February 5th through March 6th. We have grants up to $7,500 to help you get your employees or clients or customers to and from your place of business or organization, churches, nonprofits, without driving alone, for either programs, infrastructure, or even just planning grants, up to $7,500 for small businesses and nonprofits, kind of an unlimited amount for larger organizations. You can go to movabilitytx.org/go grant for more information about that. And in addition, we've got this program called Move Pass. If you've got employees that could use transit and they want a discount on their monthly transit passes, but maybe you're an itty bitty organization and can't buy in bulk, Movability can do that for you and pass the discount on to your employees. So you can go online to movabilitytx.org/movepass for more about that. But it's not about Movability today. It's about Transit Forward. And I wanted to see, before we end the show today, are there any recommendations you have for somebody who wants to get more involved with Transit Forward, or any other calls to action?
Yeah, I think number one, visit our website. There is an email list to sign up for emails on the website. Also follow us on social media, on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. We are just Transit Forward. I think on Instagram and Twitter, it's transit_forward. I would also love for you to follow me on socials. It's Ashika from Austin on all socials, and I would love to keep you up to date with things like that. We are also signing up new members every day for Transit Forward to be part of our coalition of transit advocates. So if you as an individual or your organization is interested in membership to Transit Forward, please sign up for those emails and reach out to me, and we can get that going.
Well, thanks again very much to our guest, Ashika Ganguly, and to Bill McCamley from Transit Forward. And thank you for being a guest. Please join us next month when our guest will be Chris Nielsen, the CEO of eCab, who'll be talking about his interest in providing some shuttle service in downtown Austin. You can always be a guest on Movability Live by getting in touch with us at Movability, and I hope to see you out there. Thanks again. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.